Hi, Wes and Tamara. Welcome to the show.
Hello, so
Hey.
delighted to be here.
Great to be here. All right, so briefly introduce yourselves and your research around meaningful work.
So, Bless and I met on the first day of graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. And we both came to graduate school to study meaningful work, although we both had very different backgrounds. So, I came after starting a career in advertising and then transitioning into a consulting role where I wrote my first book, The Secret to Peak Productivity, and spent 15 years consulting on productivity systems and productivity enhancement in organizations. And what I was noticing in that work is that there was a virtuous cycle in place because when we had systems and time management techniques that helped us be more productive, we had more time to spend on meaningful work. But then when work felt really meaningful, people were energized and engaged and even more productive. And so I went to Penn to study the science behind this virtuous cycle. And then I'll let Wes tell you his background.
I actually started my career in hospitality. So I spent about 10 years opening restaurants, nightclubs, event space in different parts of the country, and then transitioned from there into social enterprise. I worked at a consulting company called Purpose in New York for a long time that advises brands with social initiatives on digital engagement and strategy and those sorts of things. And I did that because I wanted work that was a little bit more meaningful to me personally. And I loved working at Purpose, and I got a chance to experience a lot of other organizations through that consulting work also. And what I found was that mission driven, just because an organization was mission driven, didn't necessarily mean it was a great place to work, which I was something I had assumed maybe naively. But during my time there, I got really interested in why that was, like what is it that actually makes somewhere a great place to work? How do you put together like an interesting group of people and help them work well together and achieve big things together? And so I got interested in organizational psychology and started reading like Adam Grant and other folks like that, and that eventually took me to Penn, where I met Tamara, kind of with this idea of how does one create a playbook for leaders to build an organization where meaningful work happens, and what does that look like at the individual level as well.
Yes, and everybody would be like, "Yes, sign me up for the playbook," because I feel like
Uh,
I feel like this is not a hard sell, right? Like to your earlier point, like meaningful work makes people more productive, and we're at this, standstill a little bit with all these return to office mandates and other things where it's like the root of what I feel like we want is more productivity, more efficiency, right? And meaningful work is a way to get there, and yet those two things it feels like you can't have one without the other, but to your point with your research is that you can, right?
hmm.
Absolutely. We find that the more that work feels meaningful, the more engaged we are, the more creative we are, the more resilient, the more likely to stay. And so all the outcomes that exactly what you're saying that leaders want, that we want, because it also feels good to be energized and engaged. And at the end of
Yeah.
the day, when we have a really productive day, we feel better. And so we want this, organizations want this. And what we find is that meaningful work is the upstream factor that leads to all these outcomes. It's a really sound strategy for leaders who are tired of dealing with these issues as separate things. Like, let's do the engagement survey. Now let's measure productivity. And now let's do, retention and turnover. If you go upstream and make work meaningful, all these other outcomes that are so important that we care about kind of take care of themselves.
Yeah, I have personally experienced this in jobs I was not excited about, didn't have a purpose. Definitely it wasn't meaningful to me. And then I've gone, so for example, I started as an admin assistant at a university, was not meaningful. Then I became a recruiter at Hulu, very meaningful. Like, wow, pep in my step. I was excited, I was energized. I wasn't checking the clock, and not that you need to then go too far overboard into the hustle culture world, but I'm just saying, like, I have personally experienced the that connection and how that was the best productivity jolt I could have gotten. I,
Can I
oh,
ask a
sorry, go ahead.
question about that just really quickly? It's really interesting. So you were a recruiter at Hulu, which again is not like the first job that comes to mind when people think meaningful work. What was it about that job that made it really meaningful?
I think it was the culture. I was really excited to be in a culture where it felt like there was urgency. We were building something cool, but we also needed to build it somewhat quickly. And I also felt I had a direct impact with my work. So I was recruiting tech or software developers for the company. Well, to build all the cool things we needed to build, they needed software developers. So I think the impact piece led to what I'm doing has a direct impact. I can see the direct impact, connect the dots. And then from there, I was able to feel energized by like, okay, how can I go out and find the best candidates for this role? So I think the meaningful piece for me also came with the impact piece.
It's
Yeah.
so it's so interesting to see. Like even now, you're lighting up a little bit talking about it. You're getting excited about it, and what you're talking about, that being able to connect your impact to the larger goals of the organization, falls into what we call the contribution source of meaning. So meaning comes from the three C's: community, contribution, and challenge. Community being the feeling that you belong, that you're a part of a community, that you can show up authentically and bring your full self and your full ideas to the table. Contribution, the understanding that your work matters to other people. And sometimes that's, customers, sometimes it's, clients or other stakeholders. Often, though, it's also just how are you contributing to your colleagues? How is your work making a difference on your team? How is it laddering up like yours was to the larger goals of the organization? And are you able to see that, and finally challenges the individual ability to learn and grow. So are you being stretched? Are you having the opportunity to expand your capabilities? I'm really interested, in your example, Lauren. Did anyone kind of tell that story for you? Was there a leader or someone else on your team who helped you connect those dots between what you were doing and, the larger impact it was having?
I mean, at the time, this is back, 10 plus years ago. So Hulu, I mean, that was back in the days when people were just trying to get comfortable watching TV on a screen that wasn't their TV. So I
Mm,
will say this is like early days, and so my memory of it is very much like, yes, the leaders were essentially telling us like, we are building this really cool thing. This is the future of how people are going to be watching TV. Again, this is like, it's hard for people to remember this time, but if you're
yeah.
old enough, you can remember a time when this didn't exist. So I think the top leaders did a great job at it. I think the middle managers were very focused on like when you're recruiting, sometimes it's a numbers game. It's this that we have this
Mm-hmm.
many open roles. How are we going to do it? We need to figure out how to get more people to accept our offers. But it's interesting that you asked me that question, just because I did see that in your research, it showed that nearly 50% of an employee's sense of meaning at work comes from their leadership. And that's really interesting because I think about like, how can leaders create more meaningful work in an environment? Obviously, I'm in a different company now, and I think the leaders do a really good job at that. But I can tell it's something that they're constantly thinking about. So, I guess what are some of the key ways for someone who's listening to this who maybe doesn't have this, or they're a leader and they want to create this? How do they go about that?
Yeah, and that was actually really surprising finding of our research of how great the impact is of leaders on the experience of meaningful work. And so we were excited about this finding and about, the playbook of practices we found. And so we think of these practices underneath each of the C. So let's zoom in on community for a second here. So community is the feeling that you matter as an individual, to others around you, to the organization. And so the most powerful question in our research that we asked that predicted a strong sense of community was this: does your leader care about what's happening in your life outside of work? And those who answered yes felt really connected and accepted. And so, a simple practice that you can do is, instead of diving into the to-dos and the you said that the numbers and we got to hit our targets. Of course, that's really important. But take a moment to ask somebody about something beyond their to-do list. Take a moment to share something about you that's beyond your to-do list. Those moments of connection can be really powerful. They don't cost anything and they don't take that long. And so finding time to connect with people can be a really powerful source of community, which then makes work really meaningful.
It's funny you say that, I just got a new manager. And so we're having new team meetings and there's a new agenda that we're using. And in the agenda, we always start with an icebreaker, three updates of your work, like your three core updates. And then the last part is life updates. And everyone is supposed to include something in there. It can be good, bad, negative. And I think it's been nice because this manager is including good and bad,
Mm.
my dad is ill and I need to go take care of him, but also my nanny was out sick this week and that was really hard. And I feel like there's something about, to your point about sharing your life, but also being, uh, having the example of a leader who's sharing not just like the highlight reel, but also the real thing so that you feel more comfortable maybe saying like, hey, my kids don't have school on Friday and I don't have any childcare. I'm not going to get that report on by Friday. Something like that. So to your point, you can share your real life because that does come into work. Absolutely.
Yeah, what an amazing way to. It sounds like this leader is also role modeling that by sharing those things that maybe aren't going to make it onto Instagram, right? And creating the space for other people to do that. That role modeling of vulnerability and intentionally creating the space for that, inviting people to show up is such a powerful practice. And we're seeing that it's even more important now that we're very often not in the same room. We're working in a hybrid or a remote environment. And it's so easy to be transactional in that way, where you hop on a Zoom or
Yep.
you hop on a Teams call, you write down to business, and then you click off. And as a leader, or even just somebody else on the team who's interested in deepening connections with other people, you have to block that time out. You have to create that space intentionally, and that takes a little more work. It takes a little more work, and it can feel like it takes a little bit more time. And I'm sure there's somebody that rolls their eyes every time they're like, oh, I have to give a life update, right? And probably appreciates it even if they begrudgingly do so.
Yeah, totally. What about the other C's? So contribution and challenges. What can leaders do in those areas?
So for contribution, again, the most cost-effective and time-effective thing a manager can do is to say thank you. Recognize people's impact and contribution. There's research showing that one thank you once a week from a manager is enough to cut burnout and disengagement in half. Just one thank you once a week. And less than 40% of people feel like they are adequately recognized for their contributions. And so this can be a very simple way to notice people, help people feel seen, right? I noticed how you handled that call today. Thank you. You turned a frustrated client into a loyal customer. Thank you so much. Just like noticing people. Sometimes we're just busy doing our jobs, and having somebody notice that we did a good job means so much.
I would add to that also. I think that's absolutely right. This thanking people is so underutilized, right? And something that's so easy. And I want to highlight also what your leaders did for you at Hulu. They sort of created that vision, of transforming the way that we consume content, not on our TVs, but on other screens, and help tell the story of how your work was laddering up to that. And that story is a big part of it as well. And so telling those stories, and also, if possible, connecting people to the folks that are impacted. So if they had sort of brought in a customer to talk about, oh my God, I used to watch, shows on my TV, but now I can get them anywhere I want. I can watch them on my phone and it's amazing and it's changed my life. Just a short interaction like that can go a really long way to helping people feel what their work has accomplished.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Okay, and challenges. I feel like this is probably the most challenging one to talk about. How to
Well,
go there.
challenge. So we want to reach our full potential. right? That's one of our core drivers of motivation is to get better, to to be challenged, to be more today than we were yesterday. And so when we are in a work environment, you mentioned Hulu and how fast-paced it was, and you're always learning and doing new things. That's kind of what we're talking about, is having somebody who believes in you, who gives you these opportunities to stretch your capabilities, to expand, to learn, somebody who believes in you, who sees your strengths and plays to those strengths. And what's really important here is that we're not talking about toxic productivity and, hustle culture. We're talking about challenge with support. So what we found, and we created a matrix that we call like the zone of possibility. And that came from directly from our research. What we found is that the best way to put people in the zone of possibility, to give them that challenge seed that's really meaningful, is to have high expectations, to believe in them, know that they can reach their potential, but also offer high support, resources, learning opportunities, mentorship, access to things in the organization. So this combination of high challenge and high support makes work really meaningful.
Yeah, I think one of the complaints I hear a lot is just under resources. Under resourced. I just did an episode where it was living below your resentment line, and your resentment line is essentially when do you not have enough resources, and it's that feeling of like, and we've all had this, where you feel like you're not doing a good enough job in any parts of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're giving 50% at work, 50% at home, 50% of yourself, and it's like because you don't have the resources to do that good job, so you don't get that satisfaction and that meaning. I guess that it just like the cup is not filled, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
just consistently the tank needs a little bit more. So I totally relate to that, especially because I've noticed in my own life, when I'm fully resourced, I can do a lot. And not only can I do a lot, but I feel good about the outcome that I'm doing. I don't feel like I'm doing a 70% job.
Can you share how you've managed to become fully resourced? Because I would love to know.
I literally, it takes a village. It literally takes a village. It's like childcare, school, work, delegating, and then I mean, honestly, I think technology, I use a lot of AI to help me with
Mm,
things for shortcuts. I will pay for the delivery service for the groceries. Like, I hate to say it, but like sometimes I think my best answer to this is like, I use money to get me the resources to get me my time back because if I have time, then I don't feel the pressure. So it's a very privileged place to be talking from. But honestly, I think that, that's why I think too, like when you talk about meaningful work, I've noticed that some people are like, oh, I'll take a lower salary for meaningful work. But then I feel
mm.
like, doesn't that start to contradict like what we're getting at? Because wouldn't you feel under resourced if you weren't making enough money? What did your research show related to that?
I think this is a really interesting question. So the research, not our research, but other research shows that I believe 9 out of 10 people would take a lower paying job for more meaning, essentially, and give up a pretty significant portion of their salary for that. And I think that's interesting because I think it indicates that meaning is a very powerful motivator, right? And at the same time, that's not an excuse to pay people less just because you're giving people meaningful
Right.
work, right? A fair or even a generous salary and benefits and all of those sorts of things are really important as a foundation to build meaningful work. There's a chapter at the end of our book where we interviewed some experts about the future of meaningful work. And one of them, Zeynep Ton, who's a researcher at MIT, I believe, focuses on this idea of decent work, right? Do you have respect? Are you getting enough resources to be able to do, what you need to do and to live a decent life? And that's really a precursor to meaningful work. So I think both are important, right? And we need one to sort of unlock the other. Otherwise, we're going to probably burn out pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's one of our favorite researchers, Isaac Prelitinsky. He's at the University of Miami, and he studies mattering, our sense of mattering in the world. And he He's a community psychologist, and he says there is no wellness without fairness,
Hmm.
right? I love that. There is no wellness without fairness. And so having fair working conditions, a fair salary, fair working hours, fair schedule, those are table stakes for meaningful work. You can't have
Agreed.
wellness, you can't have meaningful work without fairness.
Agreed. It's too, I understand what you're saying. It's like the scale can tip too far where, you can be one of these people where you're making tons and tons of money and you don't have any meaning in the work that you're doing. And you can also be someone where you're like, I love what I'm doing, but I'm not making enough money to feel that sense of security, to have resources to do what I need. Again, you're living below the resentment line. And so I completely understand what you're referring to. I want to talk about some of the common roadblocks that prevent people from experiencing meaning in their work. Because I think people are listening to this and they're probably like, I want all the things that you guys are talking about. I don't know how to get that, or I don't know how to take my current situation and make it something that feels more meaningful to me. So, what are some of these roadblocks?
So I'll start with a couple, and I'm sure Wes will have some more to add. So, you know, research in social sciences finds that, the best way to increase your own well-being is to increase other people's well-being, right? So doing random acts of kindness, expressing gratitude. Those are great strategies to increase your own well-being. And we find in meaningful work something very similar. So if you're stuck and you're not feeling a sense of meaning at work, focus on creating a sense of community contribution and challenge for others. So connect with someone, ask about their, something outside of their to-do list, their personal lives, or thank them for something that they did that impacted you, or notice something that they're doing that when they're using their strengths like creativity or curiosity and highlight that. Even if you are not the one who can push and challenge them to grow, you can still notice somebody's strengths and what they're doing well and kind of give them a boost that way. So that's one way you can increase your own sense of meaning is by increasing others' sense of meaning. And I'll let Wes jump in here.
I would say just going back to the conversation we were just having about being resourced and having time. One of the biggest things that gets in the way of us figuring this out is the fact that we're running from one thing to the next. We're so busy, our schedules
Right.
are jammed, and we don't actually have time to engage with what we did, right? I was at a conference over the weekend listening to Arthur Brooks, who was talking about the right side and the left side of the brain and how we're constantly on our phones, we're going from one meeting to the next, and we're task oriented, and we're never and so we're constantly engaging, I think, the left side of our brain, and we never are paused, we're never bored, we're never like taking a step back and just allowing ourselves to process that, engage the other side of our brain. And that keeps us from being able to create meaning from those things. We know from the research also that reflection is a big part of creating meaning. So, one of the things that I've started doing, because I also am very busy, and running from one thing to the next, is creating a little space at the end of my day to look back and say, what are the things, or the thing that I did today that was actually meaningful to me, that mattered, that I'm proud of. And I think this is a great opportunity for anyone to kind of identify those things and then start to think about, where can I do more of those things going forward? Is there a way for me to focus on more of those moments that give me meaning in my job? Can I craft my way into that? Can I shift things? And if you're in a job where you don't really see a path forward, where you don't see a lot of those moments in your future, maybe it's an opportunity to start to expand your horizon a little
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when they start to think about expanding the horizon, they're like, okay, well, then what should I do? Like, where should I go that I will feel like I have this meaning at work? And obviously, the reflection is kind of like the clues
bit.
to what
Mm-hmm.
the future holds. So, I think that's right. I feel like we're all playing whack-a-mole. It's like we're over here just like, playing that game, and then we're shifting over there and playing it really quickly and then coming back. And it's no wonder we all just feel really frazzled. I heard this Jerry Seinfeld quote where he's like, I don't want quality time, I want garbage time. And garbage time is like, you don't feel like it has to be productive if you want to just sit
Uh-huh.
there and like rot on the couch and watch reality TV, speaking from personal experience, like sometimes that's what you need to feel better. So I understand it's like not everything needs to be meaningful all the time and have that kind of engagement in your life all the time. But also it's not a bad thing to pause and reflect on like, okay, what is working and how can I create more of that, right? There's probably just a lesson here, and like we need more opportunities to pause in general in
For
life.
sure.
I
Yeah,
think that's like the meta lesson of life is be
totally.
present, take a moment, pause, breathe, right? All for sure.
Yeah, and the irony of that is like people have been saying that for probably thousands of years, and we're like,
Yeah.
oh, you know what we should do? We should pause. Yeah.
Right.
I think the biggest
Um,
problem is like when we do find, I don't know about you guys, but when we do finally get those moments, or when I do, I'm like, I don't know what to do with it because
oh,
my brain has been
totally.
going from one thing to the next. And it's so hard to shut it down and actually take that pause. Yeah.
I relate to that so much. I feel like I'm a like an extreme multitasker, and so even doing like one thing at a time feels very uncomfortable because I'm like I should be doing a minimum of three things at the same time. Otherwise, what is the point of this? So
Hmm.
I understand that challenge 100%. Working on it, but still have a lot of work to do. Okay, as we wrap up, if you guys could offer one key takeaway from your research as a guide to meaningful work, what would it be?
Hmm. I would say I'm gonna do a two-part thing. One thing, but like
No,
in
that's
two part.
cheating.
No, I would say, you can find meaning in the job you already have. You don't need to go work in social justice or nonprofit or purpose mission driven. Every job can be meaningful. And meaning isn't just about the big breakthrough moments. It's about the small everyday moments that matter. And they add up to a fulfilling career. And so start small. Think about the three C's. Connect with somebody, highlight their contributions, or think about and reflect on your own. And then think about where you're learning and growing, or, and if you're not, find those opportunities. If you focus on the three C's, every job can be meaningful.
I love that.
I would just build on that and say that you have an incredible amount of agency, much more than you think, to shape the way that you look at your job, to think about your job. And if you happen to be in a leadership role, regardless of whether you're leading a project or leading people or a people manager or whatever, you also have a huge opportunity to do that for other people as well. So there's a lot more that is within your control than I think sometimes it can feel like. So take these things and take action on
I love that. That's very on brand for this podcast, especially. We're all about
them.
being proactive, not reactive. Thank you so much, you guys. Can you share a little bit more about the book, where people can learn more about you, follow your research, and we'll put all of these links in the show notes.
Great. So the book is called Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. You can find us on our website, makeworkmeaningful.com. On there, we have a ton of free tools and resources that you can download, use for yourself, for your team to find more meaning. We also have a free assessment that you can take, a self-assessment to see how you're doing on each of the C's. And so tons of resources there. And then we're super active on LinkedIn and Instagram, and we'd love to connect with people there as well.
Amazing. We'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much again, you guys. This was a great conversation.
Thanks,
Thank
Lauren.
you.